Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met someone who just refuses to play by the rules of the social game? Someone who won't bend, won't fake, and won't wear the masks everyone else seems comfortable with? That's the Sigma INFJ, the rarest personality type, wrapped inside the most independent archetype. And today, we're exposing the 10 things a Sigma INFJ could never, ever pretend to be. Spoiler alert, some of these might ruffle feathers, but that's exactly why you'll want to stick around. Let's dive in. Alright, first on the list, the conformist. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the conformist because conformity feels like slow suffocation to them. Imagine a world where everyone follows the same trends, copies the same ideas, and obeys the same rules without question. To most people, that's just life. But to a Sigma INFJ, that's a nightmare. They are wired to question, to analyze, and to see the cracks in the system that everyone else blindly accepts. While others find comfort in blending in, the Sigma INFJ feels a deep sense of betrayal if they silence their own individuality just to match the crowd. The psychology behind this is powerful. INFJs naturally value authenticity, and when you mix that with the Sigma's independent streak, you get someone who cannot be molded into society's cookie-cutter roles. They don't just dislike conformity, they experience it as a form of dishonesty, a mask that kills their inner truth. That's why you'll often see Sigma INFJs rejecting traditional career paths, questioning cultural expectations, or refusing to take part in shallow trends. They would rather walk alone in the wilderness of their own truth than march with the crowd into an empty future. And here's where it gets controversial. Society rewards conformity. It praises people who fit in, who obey, who don't rock the boat. But Sigma INFJs, they rock it simply by existing. Their refusal to play along can make others uncomfortable, even resentful, because they expose the fragility of groupthink. They show that following the herd is often just fear in disguise. That's why people sometimes label them as difficult, rebellious, or even arrogant. But the truth is, they aren't rebelling for rebellion's sake. They are following an inner compass that won't allow them to pretend. This makes them both admired and misunderstood. Some will look at them and think, why can't you just be normal? But deep down, others secretly envy their courage, because the Sigma INFJ lives a truth that most people are too afraid to claim. The truth of being unapologetically themselves, even if it means standing completely alone. Next up, we've got the materialist. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the materialist, because to them, attaching identity to possessions feels hollow and fake. In a world obsessed with status symbols, the flashy cars, the luxury brands, the curated lifestyles on social media, most people chase these things as proof of success. But a Sigma INFJ looks at all of that and sees smoke and mirrors. They know that buying more doesn't equal being more. Pretending to care about designer labels or status-driven wealth would feel like a betrayal of their deepest values. Psychologically, this comes from their orientation toward meaning rather than appearance. INFJs are naturally drawn to the inner world of ideas, emotions, and values. When you add the Sigma archetype's independence, you get someone who measures worth not by external trophies, but by inner alignment. To them, the pursuit of materialism feels like running in circles, because no matter how much you collect, it never answers the bigger questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What impact am I making? That's why Sigma INFJs often gravitate toward minimalism, intentional living, or careers and lifestyles that prioritize fulfillment over financial flexing. But here's the controversial twist. Rejecting materialism often makes them appear threatening to people who do rely on it for identity. When someone walks into a room without the expensive clothes, without the need to brag about what they own, and yet still radiates confidence, it unsettles others. That's because the Sigma INFJ shows, without saying a word, that real value comes from within, not from possessions. They expose how fragile materialism really is, because it collapses the moment the object loses its shine. This doesn't mean Sigma INFJs don't enjoy nice things. They can appreciate beauty, comfort, and even luxury, but they refuse to let those things define them. Their sense of self runs too deep. and their soul would never allow them to trade authenticity for an image. That's why pretending to be a materialist is impossible for them. They know that meaning can't be bought, and no amount of status symbols will ever replace true purpose. Third on the list, the people pleaser. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the people pleaser, because while they genuinely care about others, their loyalty to truth and integrity is stronger than any desire for approval. Many personalities find comfort in being agreeable, nodding along, and smoothing over conflicts just to keep the peace. But for a Sigma INFJ, that kind of constant self-sacrifice feels like slow poison. They know that every time you say yes to something that violates your values, you're really saying no to yourself. From a psychological perspective, INFJs are wired with empathy, but their Sigma side adds a layer of independence that refuses to compromise their inner compass. They are perfectly capable of helping others, listening deeply, and offering support. But the moment those actions become about pleasing instead of aligning, they shut down. They sense when approval seeking is masking fear, and they refuse to participate in that cycle. This is why they often walk away from toxic friendships, manipulative workplaces, or shallow relationships, even if it makes them look cold. And here's the controversial truth. Our society rewards people-pleasing. The good employee, the nice friend, the always available partner. People admire those who bend over backwards, but secretly, they exploit them too. Sigma INFJs spot this dynamic instantly, and they would rather be misunderstood than exploited. Their refusal to play the people-pleasing role can make others uncomfortable, because it exposes how much of human interaction is built on unspoken manipulation. When a Sigma INFJ says no, they mean it, and that uncompromising honesty forces others to confront their own motives. This trait often earns them respect in the long run. At first, they may seem stubborn, hard to sway, even intimidating. But over time, people realize their boundaries come from a place of authenticity, not arrogance. A Sigma INFJ's no is rare, but it's powerful, and it makes their yes far more meaningful. That's why pretending to be a people pleaser is impossible for them. Their soul simply won't allow them to betray themselves for the sake of shallow approval. And fourthly, the social butterfly. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the social butterfly because while they can navigate social settings with grace, their energy comes from solitude, not endless interaction. At first glance, people often mistake them for extroverts. They're empathetic, they're attentive, and they can hold deep conversations that make others feel truly seen. But here's the catch: it's not sustainable. Pretending to thrive in constant social environments feels like trying to run a marathon without water. They can do it for a while, but eventually, the weight of forced interaction drains them completely. Psychologically, this comes down to their unique wiring. INFJs are introverts who process emotions and thoughts on a profound level, and Sigma INFJs take that independence even further. Being the center of attention, mingling in loud parties, or bouncing between shallow conversations pulls them away from the depth they crave. While other personalities might recharge in a crowded room, a Sigma INFJ begins to feel suffocated. They need space to retreat, reflect, and rebuild their energy. This isn't a weakness, it's how their mind maintains balance. Now, here's the controversial part. Society tends to glorify the extrovert ideal. Outgoing, bubbly, always available, always on. That's the image that gets praised. But Sigma INFJs can't and won't pretend to fit that mold. Their refusal to constantly socialize can confuse people. Some may even think they're aloof, antisocial, or difficult. But the truth is, they're simply protecting their inner world. They understand that their best insights, their most creative breakthroughs, and their deepest clarity come in solitude, not in the noise of constant interaction. What makes this fascinating is that, paradoxically, when Sigma INFJs do choose to engage socially, they often shine brighter than the so-called social butterflies. Because instead of spreading themselves thin, they show up with genuine presence and authenticity. People remember their conversations, not because they said a lot, but because what they said mattered. That's why pretending to love endless socializing is impossible for them. Their energy is too precious to waste on shallow interaction, and their authenticity won't allow them to fake what they don't feel.
Fifthly, the shallow charmer. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the shallow charmer because everything about their nature rejects superficiality. You know the type. People who can glide through social interactions with endless small talk, handing out empty compliments, and using charm as a way to climb ladders or win approval. It works for some, but for a Sigma INFJ, that kind of interaction feels fake, draining, and even insulting to their intelligence. They can sense when words carry no weight, and their intuition instantly picks up on the emptiness behind the performance. Psychologically, INFJs crave depth, and Sigmas in particular refuse to compromise on it. They aren't interested in the mask you wear to fit in. They want to see the raw, unfiltered version of who you really are. That's why shallow charm doesn't just feel uncomfortable to them, it feels dishonest. They'd rather endure silence than fill a conversation with meaningless chatter. This makes them magnetic to some and intimidating to others. Because while most people are used to being flattered or entertained, encountering someone who insists on depth can be unsettling. Here's the controversial angle. In today's world, superficial charm is often rewarded. The loudest voice in the room gets attention. The slick talker gets the deal. The smiling networker builds connections, even if they're paper thin. But Sigma INFJs expose the fragility of that system. They remind people that true connection can't be built on surface-level exchanges. Their refusal to play the shallow charmer highlights how many social interactions are just performance, and once you notice it, it's impossible to unsee. The irony is that when Sigma INFJs do engage socially, they can be incredibly charismatic. But it's because they're authentic, not because they're trying to charm. Their presence feels real. Their words carry meaning, and their energy draws people in without effort. That's why pretending to be a shallow charmer is impossible for them. They would rather risk being misunderstood than betray their need for honesty and depth. 6 on the list, the ruthless opportunist. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the ruthless opportunist because their moral compass simply won't allow it. In competitive environments, the people who climb the fastest are often the ones who step on others to get ahead. They cut corners, manipulate, and exploit situations without a second thought. To many, that's just how the game is played. But for a Sigma INFJ, pretending to be that person would feel like selling their soul. They would rather walk away empty-handed than win by betraying their values. Psychologically, this comes down to a combination of empathy and intuition. INFJs are naturally tuned in to the emotions and motives of others, and Sigmas sharpen that awareness with independence. They know when someone is being taken advantage of, and they know when power is being abused. But here's the twist. Their insight could easily make them powerful manipulators if they chose to use it. They can read people with uncanny accuracy. They can sense vulnerabilities, fears, and desires. If they wanted to play dirty, they could. But they won't, because it violates their inner code. That's the difference between raw ability and conscious choice. Now here's the controversial truth. In a society obsessed with winning, the ruthless opportunist often looks like a role model. They're praised for being bold, fearless, or driven. But Sigma INFJs quietly expose the dark side of that success. They remind people that stepping on others isn't strength, it's weakness disguised as power. Their refusal to play the ruthless game unsettles those who rely on manipulation, because it shows that there's another way to succeed, through authenticity, vision, and respect. Ironically, this is what makes Sigma INFJs such natural leaders when they step into positions of influence. People follow them not out of fear, but out of trust.
They prove that integrity doesn't make you weak, it makes you untouchable. And that's why pretending to be a ruthless opportunist is impossible for them. To do so would be to deny the very core of who they are. And for a Sigma INFJ, nothing is worth that price.
All right, seventhly, the indifferent observer. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the indifferent observer because their awareness of people and situations runs too deep to ignore. While others might walk through life with blinders on, a Sigma INFJ notices everything. The subtle tone shift in a conversation, the hesitation in someone's body language, the unspoken power dynamics in a room. Their intuition is like radar, constantly scanning for truth. And because of this, they cannot just sit back and act like they don't care. Psychologically, this comes from their heightened sensitivity to patterns and emotions. INFJs are wired to pick up on the undercurrents most people miss, and the Sigma archetype amplifies that by refusing to filter or sugarcoat what they see. When they witness dishonesty, manipulation, or injustice, it stays with them. Pretending indifference would feel unnatural, even impossible, because their inner world is too engaged with what's happening around them. They are not passive observers of life. They are active interpreters of it. Here's where it gets controversial. Society often rewards indifference. The people who look the other way when rules are broken, who keep quiet to protect themselves, are often seen as smart or practical. But Sigma INFJs defy that logic. They expose the cost of indifference, the way silence enables corruption, the way looking away lets injustice grow. Even when they don't call it out publicly, their energy shifts, their actions change, and their withdrawal itself becomes a statement. This makes others uneasy, because deep down, they know the INFJ sees through the facade. And that's what makes Sigma INFJs so unique. They don't always need to shout, protest, or fight loudly. Sometimes their refusal to ignore what they see is powerful enough. People sense that they're not fooled, and it unsettles those who thrive on deception. That's why pretending to be indifferent is impossible for them. Their awareness won't let them, their conscience won't let them, and their authenticity won't allow them to play blind in a world that desperately needs more eyes wide open. And eighthly, we've got the spotlight seeker. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the spotlight seeker, because chasing constant attention goes against everything they stand for. In a world where social media rewards loudness, self-promotion, and being seen at all costs, it's easy to think that visibility equals value. But a Sigma INFJ doesn't buy into that equation. They don't crave applause, likes, or validation. Their sense of self-worth comes from within, and pretending to thrive under the spotlight would feel empty and false. Psychologically, this comes from their introverted nature combined with the Sigma's independence. INFJs are natural visionaries. They can lead, inspire, and influence, but they do it quietly and intentionally. They'd rather be the architect behind the scenes than the performer on stage. To them, the spotlight can feel like a cage, forcing them to play a role that doesn't match their inner truth. While some personalities feed off external recognition, Sigma INFJs feed off alignment, making sure their actions reflect their values, even if no one is watching. Here's the controversial part. Society often treats attention as proof of success. The person with the loudest voice is seen as the leader. The one with the biggest following is considered the authority. But Sigma INFJs challenge this illusion. They show that true influence doesn't need a stage. Their quiet confidence unsettles spotlight seekers because it reveals that attention and power are not the same thing. A Sigma INFJ can walk into a room, say little, and still command respect, not because they chased it, but because they embody it. This is what makes them unforgettable. People may not always understand them, but they feel the weight of their presence. That's why Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the spotlight seeker. They don't need the glare of external validation, because their light comes from within. And ironically, it's this refusal to chase attention that often makes them stand out even more.
Ninthly, The carefree pretender. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the carefree pretender, because beneath their calm and composed exterior lies a depth of feeling that never switches off. On the surface, they may appear relaxed, collected, even unbothered by the chaos around them. But the truth is, they feel life on a deeper frequency. Every choice, every interaction, every moment carries meaning to them. Pretending that nothing matters, that everything is whatever, would feel like erasing the very core of who they are. Psychologically, this comes from their unique blend of empathy and introspection. INFJs are natural, deep thinkers, and Sigma INFJs take it to an extreme by constantly analyzing the layers beneath the surface. They don't just see events, they feel the ripple effects. They don't just hear words, they sense the emotions behind them. This heightened perception makes it impossible for them to shrug off life as if it were a casual game. Acting carefree would mean ignoring the very insights that define them. Now here's the controversial truth. Modern culture often glorifies the carefree persona. The too cool to care attitude is marketed as confidence. The idea that detachment equals strength is everywhere. But Sigma INFJs flip that narrative on its head. They show that depth is not weakness, it's power. Their refusal to play the carefree pretender makes some people uncomfortable because it forces them to confront the emptiness of a life lived on the surface. The Sigma INFJ reminds us that pretending not to care is often just fear of vulnerability in disguise. And that's what makes them unforgettable. While others numb themselves with distractions or fake detachment, the Sigma INFJ chooses to feel, to reflect, and to care, even when it hurts. Pretending otherwise would not only be dishonest, it would strip away their greatest strength, their ability to find meaning where others see none. That's why being the carefree pretender is a role they could never play. Their depth won't allow it, and their authenticity won't let them.
Last but not least, the inauthentic self. Sigma INFJs could never pretend to be the inauthentic self because everything about their personality rejects masks and false identities. Many people slip into roles to fit in: the dutiful employee, the easygoing friend, the perfect partner, even when those roles don't align with who they truly are. For a while, it works, but for a Sigma INFJ, wearing that kind of mask feels unbearable. They can sense immediately when they're betraying their inner truth, and no external reward is worth that cost. Psychologically, this comes from the INFJ's core need for authenticity. They thrive on alignment between their inner values and their outer actions. Combine that with the Sigma archetype's fierce independence, and you get a personality that simply refuses to play along with falsehoods. To them, pretending to be someone else isn't just uncomfortable, it's destructive. It tears at their sense of identity and leaves them feeling hollow. That's why, even in situations where being fake would make life easier, they can't sustain it. Their intuition and integrity won't allow it. Here's where it gets controversial. Society is built on performance. We reward people for saying the right things, for looking the right way, for fitting into boxes that keep the system running smoothly. But Sigma INFJs break that illusion just by existing. Their refusal to fake it challenges people who rely on masks to survive. And while some admire them for their honesty, others resent them for exposing what they try so hard to hide. This is what makes Sigma INFJs unforgettable. They may not always be the loudest or the most visible, but their authenticity leaves a permanent impact. People remember them not for the roles they played, but for the truth they embodied. That's why pretending to be inauthentic is impossible for them. To wear a mask would mean losing themselves, and for a Sigma INFJ, there is no greater betrayal than that. So there you have it, 10 things a Sigma INFJ could never pretend to be. Do you recognize yourself in any of these? Or maybe you know someone like this, quiet, mysterious, unshakably real. If so, share this video with them. And here's the controversial question for the comments. Do you think being this authentic is a strength in today's world, or a weakness? Let's debate it below.